You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is April the 23rd, 113th day of the year. 252 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays observances. It's National Take a Chance Day. German Beer Day. National Picnic Day, World Table Tennis Day, World Book Night, and I read most nights, so I'm on board with that. National English Muffin Day, National Talk Like Shakespeare Day, English Language Day, Canada Book Day, National Administrative Professionals Day, National Cherry Cheesecake Day. Speaking of cheesecake, if you're in El Paso, go to the Cheesecake Outlet, 404 Arizona. They got the best cheesecake you ever want to put in your mouth. And National Creator Day, National Log Dog Awareness Day, Movie Theater Day, National Email Day, and National Asparagus Day, National Lovers Day, Impossible Astronaut Day, Slay a Dragon Day, St. George's Day. You know, legend has it St. George killed a dragon. Today, his bravery is celebrated worldwide. National Sovereignty and Children's Day, World Book and Copyright Day, Spanish Language Day, Every Kid Holiday Week, and Feet Week. Alrighty. Let's see what we got in the way of news, because there's all kinds of things going on these days. You have no idea what kind of things are taking place. As a continuation of America Last, an illegal immigrant convicted of killing some teens in a high-speed crash is going to be released early. One of the victim's parents adamantly opposed. This was in Orange County, California, a high-speed crash. It's an illegal immigrant, convicted felon, expected to be released from prison over 6 years before his 10-year sentence is up. We must be understanding, don't you know? His name is Oscar Eduardo Ortega Anguiano, 43, driving drunk. He was high on a kite, going almost 100 miles an hour on the 405 in Orange County. Crashed into a car being driven by a young couple, 19-year-old Anya Bartholomew and Nikolai Ososkin. Killed them both. In fact, they burned alive in the car. He was convicted on 2 counts of gross vehicle manslaughter while intoxicated. And Immigration and Customs Enforcement put out a detainer for his arrest following his likely release by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. But the Golden State sanctuary laws lead to questions about whether the state will actually obey that detainer. Now, they do typically cooperate with ICE detainers, but you know, this poor, misunderstood, undocumented immigrant, just because he has a bunch of felonies on his record, it's, you know, we must be understanding. The lunatics we've got running this country. There's a Virginia town we're going to dissolve their police department. Purcellville initially proposed disbanding the police force to save themselves $3.2 million. Got to have enough money to pay the graft and kickbacks, you know. There was a backlash from the town's residents. Located in Loudoun County, Virginia, found itself about $50 million in the red after the construction of a major wastewater treatment facility. So the council came up with a brilliant idea to tighten the budget. They're going to disband the local police force and rely on the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office for law enforcement. That decision led to recall petitions being submitted to remove a number of council members and the vice mayor. Council members who proposed eradicating the force said they wanted to do so to reduce water bills for the town's 9,000 residents. But the council reversed course and voted to fund the police force at $3.2 million for 2026. The residents were outraged. The result of the vote was met with cheers by residents in attendance. And now, it seems to me that before you vote to do all these wonderful things, to wastewater plants and all this other, do some basic math. Now, the sheriff of the county released a statement before the meeting. Said the town council and the manager had not discussed any plans with him. And he said it would take a whole lot longer than 2 months for his office to take over. Democrat approval ratings are well underwater. Prime Minister of the UK is backtrack on the trans women are women claim after the Supreme Court in Britain said they aren't. Ken Starmer said, well, a woman's an adult female, and the court's made that clear. So somebody who identifies as a woman is not legally in Britain a woman, which I'm sure has all these transgenders who've run to England to hide from President Trump up in arms. Well, Nike is funding a child transgender athlete study. Now, they're denying it, but all the evidence points to them doing it. Hegseth, in spite of all the rumors about him resigning or being dismissed by President Trump, has still got the backing of the White House. Maryland illegal immigrants, you know, the group that all the elected officials are bowing down to. A couple of Maryland illegal immigrants have been arrested after a woman was found murdered in the woods. They found fake federal documents belonging to Casey Robinson, Alexi Barrera Rosa. One of the illegal immigrants charged was that was his girlfriend. Charles County Sheriff's Office in Maryland announced Monday that 24-year-old Casey Robinson Alexi Barrera Rosa is charged with murder and the killing of his girlfriend, Lesbia Milith Ramirez Guerrera, 23. Reported missing March 31st. Rosa's uncle, Robin Eduardo Barrera, 37, was charged as an accessory. She was the mother of 2 young children. And what does that matter? George Clooney believes Trump will just go away. Claims no Republican can replicate his charisma. He said the country's been in much worse places than now. Now, George Clooney, if you'll recall, was one of those that jumped on the dump Biden bandwagon. Well, the Biden team and all the Democrats need to admit they were gaslighting the country about the president's mental fitness. The people in the White House at the top of the Biden campaign conducted a brilliant gaslighting campaign. to make it appear that President Biden was, as they kept saying, at the top of his game. DHS Chief Kristi Noem's purse was stolen days after a similar incident happened blocks away. 3 days before hers was stolen, another woman had hers stolen. The victim told NBC News she's eating at a restaurant inside the Westin Hotel and noticed her purse was missing about the time they finally got the check. Police reports cited that the suspect snatched the bag from the chair it was hanging on. Well, Jackson, Mississippi. The mayor is facing federal bribery charges. There's a mayoral election going on. And State Senator John Horn has declared victory over two-term mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba. Lumumba, Hines County District Attorney Jody Owens II, and Jackson City Councilman Aaron Banks are all facing charges of conspiracy to commit federal program bribery, honest services, wire fraud, and money laundering. They were indicted last November. The indictment alleged that 3 Democrats accepted payments, including $50,000 for the mayor's re-election campaign, from 2 people they thought were real estate developers looking to build a hotel near the city's downtown convention center. Well, wonder of wonder, those 2 guys turned out to be FBI. It's just absolutely baffling why the Democrats feel they're entitled to whatever they can get their hands on. Now, there's no saying when a bar's about to close for the night. Something like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And that pretty much sums how Americans feel about illegal immigrants in this country. I know our current congresswoman here in El Paso, I went to her office with an issue about veterans services, and her office told me, very upfront, very vocal, we don't have time for the little problems of disabled veterans. We must take care of all the undocumented immigrants that came into this country. You have to take a back seat to them. So serving my country obtained me nothing. Well, Amazon has just cut prices on Apple Watches. It's a temporary deal. It's the Series 10, Ultra 2, and SE Apple Watches are now on sale. With the Series 10 available at $70 off. So if you need a new watch, you might check about the Apple Watch. I'm on my second one. And it is phenomenal. First one had an issue, they replaced it. Well, Pope Francis is lying in state. And more people are going to view the Pope lying in state than any president that's died recently. Well, Ransom Canyon star thought her career was over before she got the Netflix role. Minka Kelly became a household name. She started as Lila Garrity in Friday Night Lights from 2006 to 2009. And then the work dried up. You know, she's back. "25 vulnerable House Democrats are being targeted by the GOP. There's an air blitz offering airfare to El Salvador. I mean, instead of taking care of their constituents, all these Democratic elected officials are tearing their clothes and crying and stomping on hankies about an illegal who was deported to El Salvador. Now, they keep saying it's a mistake, he shouldn't have been sent, but he, in addition to what's supposed to have been illegal, helping illegals come into the country, he also used his wife as a punching bag. National Republican Congressional Committee is targeting a list of 25 vulnerable Democrats in the House of Representatives. They were doing a blitz ad campaign offering to buy them plane tickets to El Salvador on the condition they live stream the whole thing and take plenty of selfies with their MS-13 buddies. It's just, why don't they worry about the people that elected them? Well, and all the fighting between the administration and Harvard, the forgotten people are the Jewish students, many of whom were threatened and victimized by the empowered anti-Semites being protected by the administration. Well, that took care of our news. You know, yesterday's show centered around what I refer to, and others have referred to as our haunted planet. There's a lot of mysteries that we have no clue how to solve. And making it even more confusing are the pronouncements by scientists. Now, a lot of these scientists are actually pseudoscientists. Now, I'm sure in your education, you've come across pseudoscientists. I had a number of professors that would fall under the label of pseudoscientist. And there are 4 attributes that make it easy to spot them. Number 1, they consider themselves geniuses. Towering geniuses are years ahead of their time. Colleagues and researchers that don't agree with him are ignorant blockheads because they don't recognize his genius. And he's paranoid, feels he's a victim of a vast conspiracy designed to suppress his brilliant work. And in a lot of cases, these conspiracies become a vital part of the subject matter. And he'll write reams of, I say he, I've known some female pseudoscientists. And they delight in focusing their attention on the greatest scientists and best established theories and attack them. Now, part of the problem seems to be that, there's been a lot of mystery, I guess you could say. There's physical mysteries, there's mental mysteries, and a lot of those mysteries have led to the creation of cults, such as the folks who firmly believe Atlantis is real. And then take it one step further, you've got Lemuria, another lost continent, and Mu, supposedly the mother civilization of humans. And a lot of the information that writers put forth are information that comes from some of the strangest places. George Adamski wrote about a lot of it based upon his visitations by aliens. In the Middle Ages, people were claiming to have been kidnapped and taken to underground palaces built by fairies or the little people. And then in 1944, there was a magazine called Amazing Stories. It was a science fiction magazine. And a man named Richard Shaver wrote a story called I Remember Lemuria. Now, it was a science fiction magazine. And yet the editor, Ray Palmer, was inundated by thousands of letters from people who swore they had had those same experiences. They described things identical to the flying saucer phenomenon that really got its start in 1947 with the crash at Roswell. So it's very hard to explain how something written as fiction can suddenly appear to be sworn to be true by thousands and thousands of people. In fact, I met one of the people who had been associated with Richard Shaver, and he talked for hours about the topics that Shaver wrote about. Now, strange illusions and distortions of reality have always haunted the human race. When I did my show in California, which is called Adventure Radio, and I had psychics and I had everybody you could imagine. And my show was taken off the air because I wouldn't get on the La Raza bandwagon. The station wanted so badly to be liberal, and I had built a hell of an audience. But somebody said something, and the assistant station manager took a dislike to it, and my show had to go. And Emanuel Swedenborg, a great mathematician, wrote a number of books about his experiences with elementals. And I mean, it's just amazing how many people you think are absolutely sane come up with some of the craziest ideas. According to Swedenborg, when spirits begin to speak with a man, he has to be aware he believes nothing they say. Kind of like dealing with politicians. Because everything they say is fabricated. And they lie. Well, Sir Walter Scott made a study of elementals and what have you. 1830, he published a series of essays. He noted when trained psychics encountered the fairies and visited their splendid palaces underground, the illusions all vanished. The young knights and beautiful ladies that people talked about encountering in these underground palaces showed themselves as wrinkled carls and naughty as hags. The stately halls were turned into miserable, damp caverns. Theologians and scholars attached to the Vatican did an investigation into the spiritualism fad in the 1850s. And as a result, a papal bull was issued to warn Catholics that spiritualism was dangerous and the work of the devil. Now, quite frankly, many of the higher ups in almost every religion you can imagine, if they didn't come up with it, it wasn't real. My first mother-in-law insisted I become Catholic. She was adamant. She'd bring back the religious wars if she could have, with me as the first victim. But that didn't last long, since when asked to confess, I always took the fifth in all seriousness. Well, despite all the religious warnings and the warnings of writers by the score, millions of people are gripped in the hopeful effort to communicate with the spirit world. And elementals, for lack of a better term, played the game and planning a whole new lore about life on other worlds. New cults were spawned, and hundreds of references were established, all based on what appeared to be sincere messages from very strange characters. We went from beliefs in fairies and their secret commonwealth to interplanetary visitors, the intergalactic council. Once flying saucers got rolling, a whole new set of theories and beliefs were generated. More and more people had encounters with Venusians and Martians in the back hills of Kentucky and the deserts of Arizona. The ones that ran all these ideas, referred to as the crew that never rests. They're always up to something. Now, once an investigator recognizes just how intangible the manifestations really are, then he gets into the more esoteric world of philosophy. He has to deal with the task of interpreting these unreal events and trying to understand their hidden purpose. I mean, why would somebody from Mars land in Bodidely, Alabama, and give some tremendous message to somebody who didn't see his first pair of shoes till he went in the military? Now, the problem is sorting out the meaningful from the rubbish and find some kind of consistency in all the communications. And if you check, the scriptures of all the great religions contain a number of subtle correlations to what's being spouted by the aliens or the fairies or the trolls or whoever you run into. And a lot of this literature deals with the rumors of some great past civilization. I was shocked to find out that Indian tribes in both North and South America have legends and myths very similar to the stories found in the Bible. They even talk about the great flood that destroyed mankind thousands of years ago. The Toltec Indians, for example, have the tradition about a Zicoali, a very high tower they erected. And as a result, their language was confused and not being able to understand each other. They went to different parts of the earth. Remember the Tower of Babel? And those that study Atlantis have labeled to assemble all this lore as further proof that Atlantis did exist as a real continent until it was destroyed by some great natural catastrophe. Now, much of the information passed along by the Atlantean elementals relates that Atlantis was an evil place dominated by a warlike technology, very similar, a warlike technology similar to our own, and that the Atlanteans eventually destroyed themselves, or were destroyed by some greater force that took a dim view of their militarism. In flying saucer lore, we have tales passed on by the spacemen about a great planet located between Mars and Jupiter. And depending on which of these elementals you talk to, it was called Maldek or Clarion, and had a dozen other names. Inhabitants of this planet learned how to smash the atom and succeeded in smashing their entire planet. It was broken into thousands of bits and pieces, and we know it today as the asteroid belt. Well, if you look at all this stuff, one important thread runs throughout all this literature. A great civilization once existed prior to the appearance of modern man, and it was either destroyed or destroyed itself. And the surviving physical evidence indicates that such a civilization did in fact exist on this planet, and its inhabitants vanished, either before or shortly after man crawled out of his cave. Now it might be, and this has been theorized by a number of writers and researchers, elementals is actually a part of the human psyche. They've been presenting us with some scrambled racial memories of the distant past. Now, just like the Garden of Eden, Atlantis may be nothing more than an allegory designed to give us a clue about our own history. In flying saucer literature, it's been elaborately detailed that Venus was actually the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were Venusians planted here to colonize Earth. Now, there are contiguous activities of the parahuman group that's remained in constant touch with us throughout history and has actually influenced our theological and philosophical ideas. These parahumans, for lack of a better term, are proven liars and mischief makers. But it is certainly possible they've been trying to tell us something about ourselves. In a number of recent years, the flying saucer occupants who have come in contact with mankind have passed along innumerable warnings about how we've been upsetting the balance of the universe with our nuclear experiments. There was a UFO report from Mendoza, Argentina, that's kind of typical of these warnings. September 1st, 1968, Carlos Pesanetti, 26, and Fernando Jose Villegas, 29, were coming home from their job at the Mendoza Casino at about 3:30 in the morning. They were driving along when their car just stalled. So they got out to look under the hood and found a huge circular machine hovering nearby. 3 creatures in coveralls appeared. And suddenly they found they were paralyzed. They couldn't move, they couldn't speak. And there was a voice that they heard. It said as though it was put in their ears through tiny earplug speakers like we have today for... I got a great set from Verizon. And the voice said, "We made 3 journeys around the sun, studying customs and languages that inhabit us of the system. Mathematics is a universal language." Then on a circular screen that appeared in the air, the 2 men were treated to a short little movie similar to TikTok. The first was a waterfall in a very lush country. Then in the second scene, there was a mushroom-shaped cloud. Then in the third scene, they saw the waterfall again, but without the water. And after that, the screen went away. The 3 entities got back into their flying saucer and flew off. And the 2 young men were able to move again. Well, if you look at that story, it's got all the familiar ingredients of thousands of other UFO contact stories. Automobiles stalled. They were paralyzed. Telepathic voices. And a simplified message. Well, police officers, doctors, lawyers, college professors, government officials, and just plain ordinary folks. The thousands have shared similar experiences in recent years. And if there is a wings over the world The members have been engaged in an all-out effort to convince us that some impending disaster is looming on the horizon. And it's not unusual they should relate their warnings with tales about past civilizations that followed the same woeful path. Frankly, the story of Atlantis could be part of our future, not our past. Maybe we're the Atlanteans. And there's a lot of things we have discovered about early man that absolutely baffles us. Shortly after he became president of the United Arab Republic, Gamal Abdel Nasser ordered a giant 80-foot statue moved from the desert outside of Cairo to a park inside Cairo. The statue had been standing for centuries near the famous Step Pyramid. So dutifully, a battery of engineers and workmen descended on it, equipped with the most up-to-date bulldozers, tractors, and cranes. And they worked for weeks and weeks. First they were perplexed and then annoyed and finally humiliated by the discovery that nothing in our battery of modern technology could budge that mammoth piece of stone. Well, as you might guess, these raise even more troublesome questions. If with the technology we have today, we couldn't budge it, how did the ancient Egyptians move that statue into place to start with? Well, archaeologists have been arguing for years about the methods employed by the ancient stonemasons in building all the various monuments and pyramids and what have you. Now, there have been a number of theories that not only suggested but been widely accepted as the answer. Some of them have been quite moronic, I have to say. Now, these theories, of course, taught to school children. Mystery solved. Now, there were over 90 pyramids in Egypt alone. Now, Egypt's not the only country, you might be surprised to learn, that has pyramids. In fact, the largest pyramid on the planet is located deep in China. Now, most of the Egyptian pyramids, according to legend, were once used as the burial places for pharaohs. But the Great Pyramid of Giza was never employed as a tomb. Nobody even knows why it was built. I've heard a number of baffling theories, but nobody knows why it was built. And the gigantic stones in these structures and the temples that you find across Egypt were apparently taken from quarries hundreds of miles away from where they were used. Popular archaeological theory at this point in time is the stones were floated up the Nile on rafts and moved into place on wooden rollers. Now, some of these blocks of stone weighed as much as 5 tons. That means in order to float them, the Egyptians had to build rafts capable of displacing 5 tons of water. Otherwise, they'd just sink. Well, history tells us the Egyptians didn't amount to much when it came to building ships. And no evidence of these 5 rafts that could handle 5-ton stones has ever been found. And of course, there are a number of other theories that all have flaws. We're told that hundreds of thousands of slaves are pressed into pyramid building during the seasons of each year. Well, if that's the case, we've got a major problem with logistics. It takes a complex organization to feed these hundreds of thousands daily and minister to their needs. And modern engineers and experts have applied their slide rules to the problem, and the most liberal estimate of the time required to build just the Great Pyramid alone is 600 years. And strangely enough, although the ancient Egyptians wrote records about everything, not a single record has ever turned up, not a single piece of papyrus describing the planning or building of these massive monuments. And these stones were cut and dressed to such perfection that a piece of paper can't be inserted between two of them. Obviously, the early stonemason were unbelievably superb craftsmen, and obviously there were a lot of them in order to undertake and complete these enormous tasks. And when there's the mystery can't logically be explained by science, out come the cultists to great explanations of their own. Those that believe firmly in Atlantis agree the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids at all. The ancient Atlanteans did. How about the UFO buffs that claim they were built by the space people? Boris K. Jessup, who was an astrophysicist and student of ufology, was asked to weigh in on the issue, and he said, well, levitation is the only feasible answer. He said, I believe the lifting force was furnished by a spaceship. It brought colonists to various parts of the earth, probably from other terrestrial areas, and it was used to supply the heavy lift power for erecting these great stoneworks. Unfortunately, it was either destroyed or taken away. And this would account for all the movement of stone over which archaeologists and engineers have pondered for eons. Well, this does present us with some contradictions. If some super society in the sky had the technology to build spaceships of vast proportions and fly it all the way to Earth, why would they want to spend their time and energy moving around stone blocks? And if they wanted to leave behind evidence of their visit, they didn't do much of a job, because we'll never figure out the meaning of these monoliths. They could have put nice little messages for us inside the pyramid, explaining the whole thing in 100 languages. Only carving found inside the Great Pyramid are a few little scratches on the roof of the upper chamber the archaeologists regard as stonemason marks. I've heard somebody who's actually seen them tell me they were just probably the ancient equivalent of Kilroy was here, which may well be the case. You know, talking about the pyramids, it's fascinating that for centuries, Ouija boards, ghostly Atlanteans, aliens, and flying saucers have talked about the Great Pyramid. They claimed it had a hidden chamber full of everything needed to explain the world. It'd be revealed at the proper time, of course. And a lot of flying saucer contactees reported getting the same notifications from the aliens. According to George Hunt Williamson, who was claimed to be an anthropologist and he was a fairly decent writer, he said the builders of the Great Pyramid buried one of their great spaceships near there. It's going to be revealed. And they're also going to show that there's a lot of secret chambers inside the Great Pyramid. And the way to get to those chambers is under the Sphinx. Well, not to be outdone, aliens got back into the great game, if you will. February 9th, 1960. Fertilizer salesman by the name of Reinhold Schmidt claimed to be picked up by a flying saucer and taken to Egypt. In fact, with the help of the aliens, he sat down and wrote a book about it called The Edge of Tomorrow. And according to Schmidt, the space people gave him a tour of the hidden chambers in the pyramid, and he saw a lot of items related to history, to include the true cross for which Christ died. He was also shown 32 tables of heavy quality paper. And he said, imagine my surprise when I found out that those 32 tables of heavy quality paper contained the events of the past, the present, and the future. And even more surprising, they were described in modern day English in black ink and a beautiful longhand. According to Smith, those 32 tables of paper showed that the present Earth cycle was going to end in 1998. Well, we're still going, so I'm not sure about that. So after all these discussions about the hidden chambers of the pyramid, here we had a genuine eyewitness, been there and seen that. Unless, of course, his adventures was just another variation of the classical visits to the underground fairy palaces of days gone by. And talking about the true cross, I talked to somebody who had tried to prove what had happened to the true cross. Used to be able, if you went to the Holy Land, even in Egypt, you could buy pieces of the true cross just for a few dollars. He said if you took all those pieces of the true cross and put it together, you didn't come up with enough for a cross. You came up with enough for Noah's Ark. Well, not to be outdone, pseudoscientists took it upon themselves to get involved in the question of whether or not there are hidden chambers in the pyramid. Dr. Luis Alvarez went to Egypt and he set up cosmic ray detectors around the Great Pyramid. And according to his theory, any cosmic rays penetrating the pyramid and passing through hidden chambers are going to be recorded as moving faster than particles that move through solid stone. And logically, that does make sense. Well, for months, they did testing, got very eccentric readings. Finally, February 6, 1970, Alvarez admitted he couldn't find proof of any hidden chambers. Now, all the other pseudoscientists and cultists and conspiracy theorists knew that was a cover-up. Well, frankly, men have been scratching their heads over the Great Pyramid for at least 4,000 years. It's never really been properly dated, and it could be considerably older than that. In fact, there was a climatologist said that a lot of the stones showed weathering by water. And the Nile area where the pyramid sits hadn't had that much precipitation in over 10,000 years. And whoever built it was so clever that couldn't even find an entrance to it until 820 AD, when Caliph al-Mamun launched a full-scale attack on the pyramid. He thought it was going to be filled with treasure. So his men chipped away at it with tools, and they heated the stones with fires and cooled them suddenly by pouring vinegar over them. And as a result, stones cracked, and eventually his men worked their way into the pyramids, and they came to a passageway that was empty. Well, after exploring, they found a larger passageway, now known as the Great Gallery, that leads upward to two small chambers. The lower chamber's entrance is so small a man has to crawl in on his hands and knees. And the upper chamber doesn't contain anything but a crude stone tub. It doesn't resemble the elaborately designed sarcophagi used by the ancient Egyptians to entomb their deceased royalty. And there was an absence of artifacts and hieroglyphics, which has caused archaeologists to scratch their head in total bafflement. Some have suggested the pyramid was used as a kind of grain elevator, and wheat was measured out in that tub. Others say there's an astronomical significance to it. Well, in the mid-19th century, a new science came along: pyramidology. A writer named John Taylor published a book in which he concluded the whole purpose of the Great Pyramid was to preserve ancient Egyptian measurements. And he measured every square inch of that thing. Later on, he was followed by an astronomer by the name of Charles Piazzi Smythe, who contended that the Great Pyramid and its measurements included prophecies of the past and the future. And he has another one that measured every inch of the pyramid, every angle. In 1864, Smythe even published a 600-page book detailing his theories. And of course, it caused an uproar in archaeological circles. He wasn't an archaeologist. How would he dare say anything about the Great Pyramid? And in fact, there's still a cult devoted to trying to prove his theories. Most of the literature about Atlantis also discusses Smythe and pyramidology. And of course, the UFO cults also have their pyramidologists. Just as the pyramids are a cornerstone in human history, they also serve as evidence to many cults of widely diversified causes. Well, apart from a few major population centers, at least during recent history, Egypt has been what you might refer to as a mud hut culture. Then, as now, the masses live undernourished lives in grinding poverty. Technical skills are very rare. But they managed to somehow quarry these gigantic stones, transport them over hundreds of miles, and put them into place with geometric precision. Now, the Egyptians built 90-odd pyramids. In fact, if you go to the Village of Meroe in the Upper Nile, there are dozens of pyramids alone. And there are numerous great temples and tombs still standing. With all that having been said, nobody's ever determined why they built the Great Pyramid. We still have archaeologists coming up with all kinds of brilliant notions, none of which can be proven. But from Egypt, let's go to Laos. While we were listening to war dispatches from Vietnam War, quite often the Plain of Jars was mentioned. Now, why is it called the Plain of Jars? Well, it's covered with jars. Huge stone jars. Some of them were over 6 feet high. Some so large they can hold 6 people. There are more than 1,000 of these artifacts scattered around a high plateau surrounded by mountains. They were carved out of limestone and granite boulders. Been there forever. But there's a few issues. Nobody knows who carved them, when they were carved, or more importantly, why were they carved? Why did anybody bother to spend weeks carving a giant stone jar in such a remote place with nothing to put in it? Well, there have been mysterious stonemasons who've left signs of their labor all over the planet. A lot of them don't really make any sense. In Costa Rica, their giant stone balls have been found deep in the jungle. Some as big as 8 feet in diameter and weigh more than 16 tons. They're round, they're smooth. And there's scores of smaller ones, some only inches in diameter. Scientists have been able to come up with an explanation for their purpose, although they're obviously man-made. And we found similar stones in Mexico and Guatemala. Well, according to Science Digest in June 1967 issue, one thing the scientists agree on is that the spears must have been important to the communities of the people that made them. With the tools they had at their disposal, it must have taken years to make just one ball, even with many men working on it. And like the jars in Laos, balls are made of granite and limestone. And let's not think this is found only in South and Central America. The U.S. is covered with strange artifacts and stone ruins of unknown origin. Every state has several mysterious sites. West Virginia remains of huge circular stone structures predating the Indians. In a lot of states, there are ruins archaeologists have muttered about being of Roman origin. In fact, there's evidence there was a Roman colony in the southern U.S. long before Europeans allegedly came to this country. Others of these sites are marked only by highway markers. But there are a few, such as Mystery Hill in North Salem, New Hampshire, that have attained some celebrity status. Now, Mystery Hill features several chambers, or topped by a granite sacrificial table weighing more than 4 tons. This table is supported on stone legs and is carefully grooved. New England Antiquities Research Association conducted some carbon-14 tests around the site in 1969, decided it was built about 1000 BC. And other investigations have demonstrated that some of the huge stones on Mystery Hill are aligned with certain stars. Each year, the sun sets directly over the winter solstice monolith on the first day of winter, when viewed from the center of the site, and that's the sacrificial table. The Delaware Indians have a tradition that a race of giants once inhabited the region of East Mississippi. They lived in enormous cities and fortifications. There are numerous references to giants and other Indian lore and ancient literature all over the world. Not to mention the Bible, with that famous, there were giants in the earth in those days. That statement came from Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. South American Indians have legends about giants and their special civilization. And most of the tales, no matter what the source, assert that giants were unfriendly and even hostile to normal man. And in order to prove they're not just legends, bones of these giants have been found in the mountains in Minnesota and several other places. Those bones show that the entities from which they came had to be 12 feet tall. So entirely possible a race of giants did exist in earlier times. And some of these huge stone constructions may have been their handiwork. But of course, science doesn't believe in giants, so the evidence has been ignored or relegated to the basement of museums. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll talk more about mysteries of the past. Till then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.